Hello again, friends. Welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips joined by Wes Mitchell today for a look at WIll Muschamp's midweek press conference ahead of Saturday's ball game at Vanderbilt. Wes, what were your top takeaways from today's presser?
First of all, I'll start where WIll Muschamp started. You know, he was wearing his One Carolina shirt and wanted to make sure to send out thoughts to everybody affected by Hurricane Florence, and said that, you know, the University of South Carolina Athletic Department is actually accepting donations right now that are going to go towards those in the state that have been affected by the flooding. So, you know, that was the first thing. You know, getting to the actual football game, I thought it was kind of your typical, you know, Muschamp press conference. I don't feel like there was a whole lot newsy from it. You know, injury-wise, South Carolina actually, you know, I would say very healthy for, you know, for this time of the year. Obviously, they've only played the 2 games, but DJ Wanham, who we've already known, you know, was going to be out. He's still out, but other than that, no new injuries to report from WIll Muschamp, you know, for this game as far as starters or meaningful contributors go. So injury report is pretty small right now. And the other thing is just you can tell the players and WIll Muschamp have a very, very healthy respect for this Vanderbilt team, Emerson. You know, I think Derek Mason, with his defensive background, Muschamp said that they've never really crossed paths, but I think there's a respect in how they do things. And, you know, Brian Edwards spoke before the press conference, and somebody sort of mentioned South Carolina's winning streak against Vanderbilt, and Brian was very, very quick to say, well, hey, the last 2 games have been a touchdown or less. So these have been dogfights with Vanderbilt, and you know what? I would expect nothing less on Saturday.
Gamecocks have beaten Vanderbilt 9 straight, looking to make it 10 Saturday, 4 o'clock kickoff in Nashville. And WIll Muschamp held his midweek press conference today, went for about 18 minutes this afternoon. And Wes, he was asked about where the team is at this point and how much does he know where the team is, because Carolina played a very good ball game against Coastal Carolina, and then came out a week later and played, you know, pretty good half against Georgia, actually outgained Georgia in the first half of that game last Saturday. But then, you know, second half that was abysmal. Georgia ran for over 200 yards in the third quarter and ended up blowing the Gamecocks out. So Muschamp really didn't have a definitive answer for where this team is right now.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody does, to be honest with you, Emerson.
Right.
You know, I think you look, like you said, I mean, was it a lesser opponent against Coastal Carolina? Obviously, but they executed, you know. South Carolina went out and executed it. You know, I think if you looked at that game and South Carolina sort of didn't play well and maybe won by 10 points or something, and you'd say, well, you know, that's one thing. But they went out and for the most part on both sides of the ball, especially on offense, did what they were supposed to do. So then you look at the Georgia game, and yes, there's a bump up in competition, and that's going to affect how you play this. Certainly going to affect the lines of scrimmage. The throwing went tighter. The receivers are covered a little bit tighter. The other team's speed to get to the ball is faster. All those things, you know, certainly have an effect on your execution. But to me, they didn't even do the little things that they did very, very well against Coastal Carolina. So, you know, we're going to find out a lot about this team the next 2 weeks, I'll say. You know, I'll take it beyond this week. The next 2 weeks are going to be sort of defining for this season, I think. And a lot of people are wondering which team is closer to the reality, the one we saw week 1 or the one we saw week 2. And it's very easy as a fan base to look at the game in week 2 against Georgia and say, well, this team isn't very good. But I think, as always, we probably put too much into single games, and we need to look at the big picture. The problem is right now we don't have enough of the big picture yet to know.
Yeah, small sample size so far for the Gamecocks, just 2 games in, and the unexpected off week with last week's game canceled due to Hurricane Florence. Let's talk about that a little bit, Wes. The Marshall game was canceled last Wednesday. Muschamp said the team had a very good physical practice on Thursday. They lifted on Friday, and he gave the team Saturday off. So he watched football all day Saturday.
As did I. You know, I sat back and watched a bunch of games on Saturday, and, you know, I think, you know, one of the other players, I think it was Jake Bentley, said that, you know, practice was maybe the best in-season practice that they had had since Muschamp had arrived in Columbia, that it was just very, very sharp. It was very intense. You know, Muschamp turned up the heat. He turned up the pressure. in practice, and the team seemed to respond to it. So I think that's a positive sign. But I'm sure it was kind of, the players talked about it. It was kind of a weird weekend for them. Some of the players sat around and watched college football all day. That's what Brian Edwards and Donnell Stanley said. Some other guys like Rico Daddle, he actually went home just to see his family for a little bit on the weekend. So it was strange, but at the end of the day, it was still just a bye week. They treated it just like a regular bye week. That means more good on good as far as practice goes. First team versus first team, but for the most part, these guys I think have been focused on controlling what they can control. That was something that was mentioned a lot. You can't control the weather. You can control how you respond to things, and that's sort of been the team's focus.
So the team went back to practice on Sunday. Muschamp said they had what was basically a Tuesday practice on Sunday. So, Wes, my question to you is, do you feel like the Gamecocks would have been better off playing the Marshall game Saturday night, or do you think having that week off will help them in the long run?
That's a good question. I really think it could go either way. If you ask me this at the end of the first quarter on Saturday, I may have a better answer for you, because either A, they're going to be so just tired of thinking about the Georgia game and sort of having that taste in their mouth that they're going to come out and play very, very well, or there's going to be a little bit of a hangover, a little bit of rustiness. So I don't know if we know yet, but I will say this: they last year, coming off of that rough Kentucky loss, they almost messed around and lost to Louisiana Tech the very next week, and maybe let that game carry over a little bit. Yep. So I think this staff, the thing I think you can say, the best thing about them is that they are a staff of teachers, and they develop, and they do a good job of making adjustments, I think. So I think, maybe having a week to just look at everything from the Georgia game, and not just sort of have to go ahead and turn the page and have some more corrections, when one of the biggest issues Muschamp said they had was miscommunication defensively, and was sort of and it all goes hand in hand, just not being on the same page mentally on the defensive side of the ball. So those are some things that maybe extra practice does help those type of things. So at the end of the day, this may be something that they were able to use to their advantage.
Gamecock Central Radio, Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell talking about WIll Muschamp's midweek press conference ahead of Saturday's Vanderbilt game. And we'd like to invite you to be a part of the Game Day podcast here on Gamecock Central. We've got the Gamecock Central hotline set up for you. That number is 497-9058. It's area code 803-497-9058. You can call that number. You'll get a voicemail. Leave us a question on the voicemail, and we will play the recording of your voice on this Saturday's Game Day podcast. So get your Vanderbilt game questions in now on the GC hotline, 803-497-9058. Wes, let's talk about Vanderbilt a little bit. They played well in a loss at Notre Dame. They really took Notre Dame down to the wire, gave Notre Dame all it could handle.
Yeah, they did, and they had some opportunities to score, but they turned the football and cost them a chance to win the game. I think that's something, especially if you're South Carolina, that maybe helps a little bit, because that's the type thing that grabs the team's attention. Nobody in a Carolina uniform or a Carolina polo there on the sideline is going into this game overlooking this Vanderbilt team. Like we said earlier, 9-game win streak, 9-year win streak, but how many times has South Carolina just squeaked out a win over Vanderbilt? Even those really good 11-win South Carolina teams, it seemed like, had just absolute Vandy. They're going to play you physical. That was something that kept getting mentioned by the players this week, is that they're a very physical team. And, I think we saw that in South Bend. They went up to Notre Dame and didn't really blink. They made some big plays, and they were right there in the game. So I think not that anybody wants to give a lot of credence to moral victories, but this Vandy team probably comes in with a decent amount of confidence coming back home. I'm sure they expect to win this game just like South Carolina does. So I will be very, very curious to see how each team performs this week.
Vandy's 2-1, so that was their first loss of the season at Notre Dame this past Saturday. Gamecocks come in a 2-point favorite in Nashville, so it's going to be interesting. Wes, I watched the entire Vanderbilt game, and I was impressed with them. I thought Shermer looked good. commanding their offense, and they got some weapons at tight end and receiver that could present some problems for the Gamecocks. So 2-point favorites for the Gamecocks. That sounds about right.
Yeah, it does. And I think, you bring up Shermer. Anytime you have a quarterback that can combine the physical ability that Shermer has along with the experience and mental ability, son of a NFL coach and a kid that's seen it all in his time at Vanderbilt. And, I think that gives you a chance. And, let's not forget, he really torched South Carolina's secondary in Columbia last year. He had a huge day throwing the football. South Carolina was able to sort of just outscore Vandy. But yeah, this kid is pretty good. I think that line is about right. I'll be curious to see if this Vandy defense really is as improved as they maybe appear to be, because last year, that was a very just uncharacteristically bad Vanderbilt defense. And, typically they've been able to lean on playing good, strong, physical defense. And last year they didn't have it. So you throw in I think an improved offense. Your veteran quarterback comes back. They have a tight end who's very, very dangerous in the passing game. Then they have Kalijah Lipscomb, you mentioned there on the outside at receiver, who's a very good player. They've got some weapons on offense, so you combine those things together with some experience, and at home, it smells like a fourth-quarter game to me.
Yeah, Lipscomb looked good on Saturday against Notre Dame, so Vanderbilt certainly could present some problems. First road game of the year in conference play for South Carolina coming up on Saturday. So, Wes, you talked about the secondary for the Gamecocks, and Muschamp talked about that a little bit today. He was asked about how would he assess the play of the safety position to this point, and Muschamp said flatly it hasn't been good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it goes back to communication and miscommunication. The fact that, he put the blame on the safeties, that there was a guy that was uncovered in the slot on a big play for Georgia that led to a touchdown. And, the safeties in this scheme have a lot on them, mentally. They're asked to do a lot, and it's not just about getting themselves in the right position and getting set. It's about making sure everybody else is in the right position as well. And, they've dropped the ball in that area at times, it seems like. So, that grinds Muschamp, knowing that's his position. That's his spot.
Yeah.
He still personally coaches the safeties. It's just like Steve Spurrier talking about the quarterbacks. He has high expectations for those guys. To this point, the safety play has not been good. And, that in this defense, that's a very important position.
Our Colin Taylor asked Coach Muschamp at the press conference today, how does he address that? How does he go about trying to improve communication by the safeties? And Colin asked him, do you tinker with the lineup, maybe put a new player in the starting lineup at safety, or do you simply work with the players you already have back there starting to try to get them to improve communication?
Yeah, and Muschamp said you don't make a change just to make a change. If the guy behind him is not communicating either, then, it does no good to make that change. We'll see, man. I think, again, some of it goes back to that there's only been 2 games. And, I think when you have, you practice as hard as you can in preseason, you prepare as hard as you can, but you never quite know how it's all going to look when you get out there. So, then you take what you see on the game field and you make your adjustments and you make your changes, and you either add more or you take away and simplify. It sounds like South Carolina's going to simplify to an extent. And Saturday, if it's worked, because, I think this is a Vandy offense that's going to shift around a little bit. There's going to be motion. It seems like these days every team either is a tempo team or they're a shift and motion team. And, from what I've seen from Vandy with their offensive staff the last few years, they're much more of a under center shift type team, and they're going to hit you with play action and, try to then find their tight ends and receivers down the field. So you have to communicate against these guys. And I think that'll be a key test for this week as well.
The Gamecocks manhandled Coastal Carolina and got manhandled in the second half by the Georgia Bulldogs. Wes, do you feel like this Vanderbilt game will tell us more about this Carolina team? Do you feel like it will tell us where the Gamecocks are? We really don't have a good handle, like you said at the start of the podcast today. So will the Vanderbilt game answer some of those questions?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, like I said, the Kentucky game as well. Nobody – that's a Carolina fan was probably circling these 2 games saying that they're season defining prior to the season. But, I did make a point throughout the offseason that this time last year, we had no idea that Tennessee was going to be as bad as they ended up being. We had no idea that Florida was going to be as bad as they ended up being. By the same token, there may be several teams on this schedule that are better than we maybe gave them credit for prior to the season. So it's easy to sit there and check off wins just looking at a schedule, but then you have to actually go play the games and you know, and the matchups and stuff like that. And when you're in a close game like South Carolina's been with Vanderbilt, you know, anything can happen. So I think certainly we'll learn a bit more about this team. It'll still just be one game. You know, if they go beat Vandy, it'll be one game. If they lose, it'll be one game. But certainly South Carolina, if they're going to have the season that a lot of people projected prior to the year, they need to win the next two, I think.
All right, Wes, appreciate your report today and looking forward to getting together with you again on the Game Day Podcast Saturday. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sounds good. We'll do it, man.
All right, that's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for joining us.